The space between their beds was a minefield of unspoken words and accidental touches. For Elise, a creature of quiet contemplation, her chaotic artist roommate Chloe was a storm of color and sound she both feared and was irresistibly drawn to. She learned the specific shade of Chloe's eyes in the afternoon light and found herself craving the sound of her humming. A single question, "Can I paint you?" shattered the careful distance between them, transforming their shared room into a canvas for a tension that built like a symphony. As a blanket of snow isolated them on the eve of a long break, that tense silence finally broke, proving that the most powerful love stories are not shouted, but whispered in the space between two hearts and two beds. Before we dive into this beautiful lesbian love story, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more romantic tales and heartfelt moments. The color of your silence. The dorm room was a perfect square of beige, smelling of industrial cleaner and the faint, sweet hope of new beginnings. For one of its occupants, it was a sanctuary of order. Her side of the room was already meticulously arranged. Books aligned by height, pens in a neat ceramic cup, a single, framed photograph of a misty coastline on the desk. She sat on the edge of her bed, her posture straight, her hands folded in her lap, trying to calm the frantic drum of her heart. She was a creature of quiet contemplation, and the impending arrival of a stranger felt like a storm on her horizon. The storm arrived with a thud against the door, followed by a cheerful curse and the sound of something heavy being dragged. The door swung open, and there she was. She was all vibrant, chaotic energy. A mess of dark, curly hair framed a face dotted with a few faint freckles. She wore a worn-out band t-shirt, ripped jeans, and a smile so bright it seemed to change the very lighting of the room. She was struggling with a large, oddly shaped canvas bag and a suitcase that seemed to have exploded en route. "Hey, please tell me you're not a serial killer," the new girl said, her voice a warm, melodic hum. "I'm your cellmate. Roommate. Sorry, first day jitters." The quiet girl stood up, a small, involuntary smile touching her lips. "I can promise I'm not a serial killer. I'm a literature major. A reader. Excellent. I can be loud, but I'm respectful. I'm an art major. Painting. Hence, all this." She gestured with a laugh to the bag full of supplies. "I'm Chloe. I'm Elise." And so it began. The first month was a careful dance of opposites. Chloe was sunlight and noise. Her side of the room became a beautiful catastrophe of paint-splattered dropcloths, half-finished sketches, and the constant, low sound of indie folk music from her headphones. She talked to her plants, sang in the shower, and had a habit of leaving mugs of half-finished tea everywhere. Elise was moonlight and silence. Her world was made of printed words, the soft scratch of her fountain pen, and the precise ritual of making her bed every morning. She was reserved, thoughtful, and initially, she found Chloe's presence utterly overwhelming. But then, the sharp edges began to soften. Elise started to notice the way Chloe would hum when she was concentrating, the specific shade of brown her eyes turned in the afternoon light. She found herself looking forward to the moments Chloe would burst into their room, full of some new story from her art class. Chloe, in turn, noticed the quiet intensity with which Elise read, the way she would bite her lower lip when thinking, the surprising, dry wit that would occasionally surface, making Chloe laugh louder than anything else could. She began to appreciate the calm that Elise carried with her, a steady anchor in the whirlwind of university life. The shift began on a rainy Tuesday in October. Elise was curled on her bed, rereading Wuthering Heights, a faint frown on her face. Chloe was at her easel, frowning at a canvas. "You're quiet today," Chloe said, not turning around. "Even for you." Elise sighed, closing her book. "It's just this book. It's so full of brutal, destructive love. It makes me sad." Chloe put her brush down and turned, her expression soft. "What kind of love doesn't make you sad?" "The kind that feels like coming home," Elise said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. She blushed, looking down at her hands. Chloe was quiet for a moment. Then she stood up, walked over to Elise's bed, and sat on the edge of it. The space between them, the few feet of worn carpet that separated their beds, suddenly felt charged, like a magnetic field. "Can I paint you?" Chloe asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elise's heart hammered against her ribs. What? I've been trying to capture this feeling. Of quiet beauty. Of peace. And I can't get it right. I think it's because I'm trying to paint an idea when the real thing is right in front of me. Elise could only nod, her throat tight. So, Chloe painted her. Not as a formal sitting, but in stolen moments. She'd sketch Elise while she was reading, or capture the way the lamplight caught her profile as she studied. Elise, who usually hated being the center of attention, found she didn't mind Chloe's gaze. It didn't feel invasive, it felt like being seen, truly seen, for the first time. The tension built like a symphony, movement by movement. The accidental brush of fingers when reaching for the same book. The nights they stayed up talking, their voices hushed in the dark, their beds feeling miles and yet only inches apart. The way Chloe would bring Elise a cup of tea exactly how she liked it, without ever being asked. The crescendo happened the night before winter break. The dorm was nearly empty, and a deep silence had fallen over the campus, muffled by a fresh blanket of snow. They were packing, the air thick with unspoken words. This was it. A month apart. The thought felt like a physical ache to Elise. Chloe zipped her suitcase shut with a definitive sound. Well, I guess that's it. I guess it is, Elise whispered. They stood there, in the middle of the room, in the space between their beds. The space that had once been a canyon of differing personalities now felt like the smallest, most significant distance in the world. I'm going to miss you, Chloe said, her voice cracking slightly. I'm going to miss this. She gestured around the room. I'm going to miss you. Elise took a step forward. Then another. Her quiet reserve shattered, not with a bang, but with a soft, shuddering breath. She reached out and took Chloe's hand. It was warm and speckled with faint, permanent traces of paint. I don't want you to go, Elise admitted, her voice trembling. The thought of not seeing you every day, it feels all wrong. Chloe's eyes glistened. She brought Elise's hand to her lips and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her knuckles. The sensation sent a bolt of lightning straight to Elise's core. Elise, Chloe breathed, her forehead leaning against Elise's. Can I, please? Elise didn't let her finish. She closed the final inch between them and pressed her lips to Chloe's. It was not a gentle first kiss. It was a month of longing, a semester of hidden glances, a lifetime of waiting, all poured into a single, breathtaking connection. Chloe's hands came up to cradle Elise's face, her thumbs stroking her cheeks. Elise's fingers tangled in Chloe's wild curls, pulling her closer. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. The room, once beige and impersonal, was now the most beautiful place in the world. I've wanted to do that since the day I exploded through that door, Chloe whispered, her laughter mixing with tears of joy. I've wanted you to, Elise replied, her own smile wider and freer than it had ever been. They didn't go home for break that night. They stayed in their dorm room, in Elise's narrow bed, curled around each other. They talked and kissed and discovered the map of each other's skin in the moonlight. They learned that Chloe had a tiny birthmark on her hip, that Elise was ticklish right below her ribs, that their bodies fit together as if designed for that very purpose. The return after break was a homecoming. Their room was no longer just a shared space, it was their sanctuary. Chloe paintings now featured a quiet, dark-haired muse. Elise's books were often left forgotten as she watched her girlfriend create. Their love story unfolded in the quiet moments, in shared showers where they washed paint and ink from each other's skin, in early morning cuddles that made skipping class far too tempting, in the brave act of holding hands as they walked across campus, their intertwined fingers a silent declaration. They learned each other's languages, Chloe speaking in bold strokes of color and passionate gestures, Elise in whispered sonnets and careful touches. They built a world in that small, beige room, a world painted in the hues of their shared love, a masterpiece more beautiful than any canvas could hold. One evening, nearly a year after that first kiss, Chloe presented Elise with a small, flat package. Inside was a painting. It was of their room, rendered in soft, warm tones. There were two beds, one neatly made, the other a comfortable mess. But in the center of the painting, in the space between the beds, two figures were dancing, locked in an embrace, their forms blurred with motion and joy. It's us, Chloe said softly. In the space where we found each other. Elise looked from the painting to the woman she loved, her artist, her chaos, her home. You painted the most important part, she said, pulling Chloe into a kiss. You painted the love. Conclusion. Years later, long after they had traded that small, beige dorm room for an sunlit apartment with art on every wall and bookshelves that sagged in the middle, the painting still held its place of honor above their fireplace. It was more than a gift, it was a testament, a sacred artifact from the moment their world had realigned itself into something truer and more beautiful. The space between the beds in the painting was no longer just a patch of carpet. It was a universe of possibility, a testament to the courage it takes to cross a tiny, terrifying distance to reach the person who feels like destiny. Elise would sometimes look at it, her fingers laced with Chloe's, fingers still often stained with a hint of cerulean or umber, and remember the two young women they had been, one so afraid of the storm, the other unaware she was one. Their love had not been about changing each other. Elise's side of the apartment was still neat, her books meticulously organized, her fountain pens lying in a straight line on her desk. Chloe's studio was still a glorious chaos of half-finished projects, vibrant canvases, and the low hum of music. The difference was that now, Elise's order was a calm harbor for Chloe to return to, and Chloe's chaos injected warmth and spontaneity into Elise's quiet world. They were the moon and the sun, sharing the same sky, each brighter for the other's presence. They had built a life, a masterpiece crafted not on a single canvas, but in the daily brushstrokes of shared coffee in the morning, legs tangled under a shared blanket at night, and the easy, comfortable silence that only exists between two people who know each other's souls. They had faced challenges, family uncertainties, the pressures of building careers, the simple, sometimes difficult work of weaving two lives into one, but they faced them anchored in the unshakable knowledge of what they had built in that little room. One evening, as the setting sun streamed through the windows, painting their home in gold, Elise looked at the painting and then at Chloe, who was sketching idly on the sofa. You know, Elise said, her voice soft with the weight of a beautiful truth. You never did just paint me that year. Chloe looked up, her smile as warm as it had been that first day. No. What do you think I was doing? You weren't capturing quiet beauty or peace, Elise said, walking over to sit beside her. She cupped Chloe's face, her thumb gently stroking a cheek she knew every contour of. You were painting a home for yourself. And the moment you asked, you were offering to build one for me, too. Tears welled in Chloe's eyes, because Elise, with her profound understanding of the unspoken, had finally named the truth they had both always felt. The painting wasn't a portrait of a person or a place. It was a portrait of a feeling. It was the visual echo of a heartbeat, the color of a silence that was no longer empty, but full of a shared, breathless understanding. Their story was proof that the most powerful loves are often the quietest ones to start. A glance held a second too long, a brush of hands, a question whispered in the charged space between two beds. It was a love that spoke in the languages they each understood best, in the bold, beautiful strokes of color that said I see you, and in the whispered sonnets of careful touch that said I am here. And as they sat together in the dying light of the day, surrounded by the life they had built, they knew. The greatest masterpiece was not the painting on the wall, or the books on the shelf, or the art in the studio. It was this. It was the two of them, forever dancing in the space they had built together, a space painted in the enduring, magnificent color of their love.